Can I ask you a question? In the area of personal life, spiritual life, family life, in your finances dealing with difficulty, what do you want to score? If it's an A to F, do you want A or do you want D, E, F grades? If you want to be excelling in spiritual life, you have to read this book. It's called Cost of Discipleship. Eternal life is free, but to be a disciple of Jesus, it will cost you a lot. You need to count the cost so that you can be a winner, so you can be a blessing, so you can be a true disciple of Jesus.
Bonhoeffer begins by distinguishing between cheap grace and costly grace. Cheap grace, he contends, is the acceptance of God's forgiveness without any commitment to a life of obedience and discipleship. Costly grace, on the other hand, is the grace that calls us to follow Jesus and requires us to forsake everything for his sake. Bonhoeffer criticizes the church for promoting cheap grace and calls for a return to the radical demands of the gospel. Throughout the book, Bonhoeffer emphasizes the importance of obeying Christ's commandments, even when they lead to suffering and persecution. He discusses the Sermon on the Mount, highlighting the radical nature of Jesus' teachings, including the call to love one's enemies. Bonhoeffer argues that to be a true disciple, one must be willing to suffer for the sake of righteousness. Bonhoeffer also investigates the idea of discipleship and the individual. He asserts that discipleship is a corporate endeavor, and individualism has no place in the community of believers. He calls for a life of self-denial, sacrifice, and service to others. In the latter part of the book, Bonhoeffer addresses the church's role in the world. He argues that the church must not be passive, but actively engage with the world and bear witness to Christ. He speaks against cheap grace theology, which divorces faith from action. Top 10 insights and applications from the Cost of Discipleship. 1. Costly grace. Bonhoeffer's distinction between cheap and costly grace highlights the importance of a faith that demands commitment and obedience. 2. Suffering and discipleship. The book underscores that discipleship may involve suffering, and Christians should be prepared to endure hardship for the sake of Christ. 3. Radical obedience. Bonhoeffer's emphasis on obeying Christ's commandments challenges Christians to live out their faith in practical ways. 4. Community and discipleship. True discipleship is a communal effort, and believers should support and hold one another accountable. 5. The Sermon on the Mount. Bonhoeffer's interpretation of Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount highlights their radical nature and calls for a higher standard of living. 6. Love for enemies. Bonhoeffer's call to love one's enemies challenges Christians to extend compassion and forgiveness even in difficult circumstances. 7. Self-denial. The book encourages self-denial and putting others' needs above one's own as a core aspect of discipleship. 8. Active engagement. Bonhoeffer's call for the church to engage with the world reminds Christians that faith should lead to action and social responsibility. 9. Church's role. The book prompts reflection on the role of the church in contemporary society and its responsibility to bear witness to Christ. 10. Countercultural discipleship. Bonhoeffer's teachings remind believers that true discipleship may run counter to the values and norms of the world.
Bonhoeffer's legacy, together with his book, The Cost of Discipleship, challenged Christians to evaluate our faith and commitment, emphasizing the radical nature of following Christ and the call to live out one faith in a practical and sacrificial way. Thank you again for watching. If you find this video helpful and informative, please hit the like and the subscribe button. I'll see you very soon.